Jenny wanted me to just let you know that she's going to be a little late. Her laptop restarted as soon as she turned it on.
Ugh, bummer. Yeah. Okay. Well, she's presenting Thursday, so I think we can get started without her. Anyone got any bird sightings or updates that they want to give before we
Yeah,
get to
I
presentation?
actually kind of have a question. I saw a bird. I'm not sure exactly what it is, but it seemed like it was like bright yellow on the underside of its wings.
Oh, I
Mm-hmm.
know those. Those are
Uh,
the I think those are actually I think those are the yellow-rumped warblers that I keep seeing.
Could be.
I just saw it fly over quick, and all I noticed was that it looked like a little brown bird, but it
Mm-hmm.
had yellow underneath the wings.
It could be yellow rumped. What type of habitat were you in?
Um, I was just driving by in like the middle of nowhere kind of country and just saw it kind of like flitter overhead.
Hmm. Yeah, probably maybe a yellow rumped. You can look them up. Common yellow throats are also back, and they have like
Oh,
yellowish parts. And if it's just flying, you might have gotten confused.
okay.
They're kind of more in like scrubby type stuff, and
Mm-hmm.
um, I see them a lot in like wetland areas around the edges of wetlands,
Mm-hmm. It just looked like the whole like underside of the wing
like
was
the
like
armpit.
yellow.
Was
Yeah,
it
like the
small,
armpit.
like a warbler, or bigger?
It seemed kind of small, like a roundhouse sparrowish size. Um,
I think
but it
probably one
seemed
of those.
it seemed not so much like the armpit, but like the whole under like side of the wing. I don't know how else to describe it, but like it extended underneath the wing, but maybe it was like kind of more like just a pale color.
Yeah.
I
I
just
don't know.
didn't.
I always think of the yellow rumped warblers. It's usually the yellow on their rump that you really notice.
Hmm.
Didn't notice that. I'm trying to think of what else this could be. It could have been something cool passing through too. So it could be
Yeah.
something that we're not used to seeing. That might be a hard one.
Mm.
Is that the type of stuff, Andre, you've been using the Merlin app, right? Is that the type of stuff that you can put into the search criterias?
Um, well, like how it spreads its wings.
Well, like yellow underneath its wing
Oh,
or something.
you can select multiple colors. Like,
Hmm.
you can select, I think I've selected like up to 3 colors before, and it does narrow it down for me. And you can like, it'll show you various pictures of the different birds, and you can like slide through them when they're like, just on a branch or on a telephone pole, or if they're in flight.
Hmm. So
It's
that
really
might,
helpful.
yeah, that might be the one to look at, Zach, because that's the free app,
Okay.
and get an idea for what it could have been.
What's it called again?
Merlin.
It's on the Cornell Lab of Ornithology website. When you go to like search for like a species, I think it says like get ID help or something.
Oh yeah, I found it.
Hmm. Yeah.
Yeah,
Anybody?
oh no, I was just saying how I really like using that thing.
Yeah, it's nice to get it narrowed down a little bit. Um, Anybody else got any birdie updates?
I do have one.
Yeah.
um, well, I mean, I have a lot, but like one thing I've been noticing a lot on my property is I think there's a mating pair of cardinals. I think they're the same pair. You can tell one's male, one's female, and they've just been hanging around my property, like on the edge of the backyard, and I feel like it's the same pair. I could be wrong, but they're always in pairs, these two.
Yeah. It probably is because they're so territorial that they're not going to let anybody else in if they're in the same exact areas. I think that is usually the same exact bird.
So they've been, and I set up some suet feeders around the yard. So been watching them hang around there.
Yeah.
I
So
actually have a question because I was wondering
Mhm.
about this. So, you know how like the female cardinal kind of looks a lot like the male, but it's just a lot less red,
Mhm.
and the carotenoids come from like food and stuff. So I
Mhm.
was wondering if like having bird feeders out can like cause the females to get so much red pigment in like their feathers that they appear male despite actually being female.
I don't think they would ever like go fully red because that's like a sexually selected trait that
Okay.
is, but I think the red on them can be redder. So like I think
Okay.
they would still have the red tips and those could be a lot brighter.
Okay.
Because there's been a lot of work with bluebirds, which, you know, it's not a carotenoid thing, but it's still considered like health, like how bright your blue is, how perfect your structural pigments are, that female color, they have the same like kind of constraints that like if you're in really good health, your color is a little bit brighter, but it's not that it takes over the rest of their body. It's just that like those points of blue or red are really nice, you know, strong.
Okay. Thank you.
Mhm.
I was gonna say I actually have a similar situation. I'm pretty sure I have a pair of nesting cardinals because they're always hanging around this one bush towards the back, and they always just will kind of like hop into the nearby shrubs, and then I hear them calling there all the time. So I don't know if maybe they have like if they've already started a nest there, or if maybe that's just where they prefer to hang out.
Yeah, no, probably. I think like it's been so cold. I don't think we're having a very early spring, so they might not be nesting yet. There keeps being nights where it's like really chilly. Um, and so, but if you keep watching that area, like cardinals definitely like nesting in like bushy, shrubby type areas. So keep an eye out for that. Um, if you have any Carolina wrens in your area, like watch for them because they're gonna nest in the most bizarre places sometimes. They like to like just find little half cavities and nest there. Kind of the same with house sparrows, they'll do it too. But I don't know exactly where we are. I don't feel like the birds in my yard have started like incubating eggs yet. I think I've seen some like carrying nesting material and stuff, but I haven't seen like full on nest activity. I think it's been a little chilly.
Oh, okay.
Um, Okay, so everyone knows where we're at, right? This week we're gonna do presentations. So we got 4 on deck for today, 4 for Thursday. If you haven't yet signed up for presentation time, send me an email after class or talk to me after class. So the idea, so we have these this week, and then your rough draft, I said that's due Friday, right? Now I'm forgetting what I said. Um, and then, so I'll get that back to you over this weekend. I can give you edits, and then the final version of your research proposal is due a week from Friday. So that's just where we're at, and then you're done with the semester. It feels like we're gonna get through this. I'm pretty excited. Um, so what we're gonna do today, everyone's gonna kind of take over screen sharing when they go to present. So we'll just give people a little bit of time to get used to it. Basically, like you share that PowerPoint or Google Slides or whatever, and then you're gonna walk us through it. The goal is that we spend 10 minutes on each presentation, more or less is fine. And if anybody has any questions at the end, we'll ask the presenters about their different papers that they're gonna present. So Zach wants to go first, then Kim, then Tiffany, then Andre. So Zach, you want to try, let me make sure I have this set up. Yeah, you should be able to share your screen.
Okay. Share screen. Share. And then there we go. Is that
Okay.
full screen for everyone?
Yeah, looks good.
Okay, cool.
All right, take
So,
over. I'm gonna mute myself so you're in charge.
okay. So the paper I covered was called Classification of Breeding Bird Communities Along an Urbanization Gradient Using an Unsupervised Artificial Neural Network. It's a lot of words, but it's not that bad once we kind of get into it. So for the introduction, they used Seongnam City, South Korea, and it's currently undergoing urban development. Their population is 930,000, which increased at a rate of 6% per year from 1978 to 2001, and the proportion of areas occupied by buildings increased 100%, which means it doubled. And the proportion of woodlands decreased 12% between that over that same period of time, and agricultural areas decreased 50% also from 1978 to 2001. Artificial neural networks are like a way of putting data together that have, they said, a lot of advantages over standard statistical methods. Specifically, they use self-organizing mapping systems, which, as far as I could understand, took data and then just kind of sorted it into groups, but we'll get into that a little bit more later. They said it's been used in a lot of other studies, and it allows you to visualize species assembly patterns in a two-dimensional space and classify that data without prior knowledge of the assembly patterns. So for the materials and methods, again, they use Seongnam City, and it's adjacent to Seoul and occupies a total of 142 square kilometers within a major metropolitan area. There are several types of environments along an urbanization gradient. So there were urban areas, which was houses and urban parks, rural areas, which is rice fields, which are usually full of water during the growing season. And then there were also dry fields, greenhouses, and farmhouses. And there were also woodlands. They had three kinds of woodlands: coniferous, deciduous, and mixed. They had two types of residential areas that they defined. Type 1 was low-rise, densely packed buildings that is almost completely paved and treeless, which took up a total of 11.9 square kilometers of the study area. And then type 2 was high-rise, densely packed buildings that had mature gardens, which was 6.1 square kilometers of the study area. And then the other areas that they defined were urban parks, which took up 3.3 square kilometers, rice fields, 2.7 square kilometers, dry fields, 12.8 square kilometers, greenhouses, 0.7 square kilometers, farmhouses, 3 square kilometers, coniferous woods, which were 10.1 square kilometers, deciduous woods, 54.4 square kilometers, and mixed woods, 6.2 square kilometers. So they had 69 type 1 residential sites. They had 83 type 2 residential sites, 16 urban park study sites, 23 rice field study sites, 25 dry fields, 8 greenhouses, 9 farmhouses, 14 coniferous woods. And then they divided later on deciduous woods into two types. Ones that were 100 to 200 meters from forest edge. They had 77 of those study sites, and the other kind of deciduous woods study sites were more than 400 meters from the forest edge, of which they had 43. So they used 5-minute long fixed observations, and they counted the number of bird species at each site, and they maintained those observations within a fixed radius of 50 meters. And they made sure that each site was at least 200 meters from the closest other site that they'd used, and they surveyed it each site 3 times during the breeding season, and then they took the mean of those 3 visits to determine the number of species that they were going to use during the study. And all of the studies were, or all the surveys were conducted during the first 4 hours after sunrise on clear days in order to make sure that there was peak song activity during their observational times. Species richness they defined as the total number of species recorded at each survey site. And then after classifying the sites using that self-organized mapping, they used an ANOVA test to determine or to identify statistically significant differences in the data for each cluster. So they, in order to use the self-organized mapping method, they have to like train the program in a lot of ways, which I quite honestly didn't really understand, but it seemed like they just ran data through it a couple of times to kind of teach the program what it had to look for and how they wanted it to be grouped up. And as far as I could understand, it groups together the similar data and then it outputs like a graph almost of similar data sets and divides them into groups that the program deems similar enough to fit into that same group, and they were defined as clusters. So they had 5 clusters. This is the results for all of those. It shows the mean and the standard error bars of the total species richness per plot. So clearly 4 and 5 are not statistically different from each other. 3, but otherwise 1, 2, 3, and then 4 and 5 are all statistically different from each. So putting 4 and 5 together, they're basically the same, statistically speaking. And then this is all the graphs for the different kinds of nesting species. So they broke it up into whether or not where that species preferred to nest, and then organized it by that. So as you can see, clusters 4 and 5 had a lot more cavity, ground, and tree canopy nesting birds than clusters 1, 2, and 3. And then clusters 1 and 2 had far more building nesting birds than clusters 3, 4, and 5. And this is basically the same thing, but instead of nesting, they divided it into how the bird species foraged. So, and instead of building, they have water for that fourth group. So they had the most water foraging species were in cluster 1, and then clusters 3, 4, and 5 had none, and cluster 2 had a few. And again, tree canopy, ground, and wood foraging groups were all highest in clusters 4 and 5. And then this shows the environmental variables of the 5 clusters. So the percent cover for impervious areas, water areas, vegetation, deciduous trees, coniferous trees, and deadwoods in each area, which is important and discussed now. So clusters 4 and 5 had high values for total species richness, like overall, compared to the other clusters. But the number of species in the tree canopy, cavity, and ground nesting groups were higher in clusters 4 and 5 than in the rest of the clusters, and the number of species for tree canopy, ground, and wood foraging groups were also higher in clusters 4 and 5 than in the rest of the groups. Cluster 3 had lower values than clusters 4 and 5 for total species richness, but it had the highest number of coniferous trees, but it had less deadwood than clusters 4 and 5. And I believe in the paper they mentioned that cavity nesting birds are more likely to nest in deadwoods than they are in living woods, like living trees. Cluster 1 had the highest proportion of water areas and thus had the highest number of species in the water foraging group. And finally, clusters 1 and 2 had a high proportion of impervious areas and low proportions of vegetative areas, deciduous trees, and deadwood. So the building nesting group was highest in clusters 1 and 2, while all other groups were low. And of course, my reference is the paper. And that was the gist of the paper.
Nice. Do you feel like you have what was their main point about urbanization? Because it's hard to remember what the clusters were. So which clusters were the urbanized ones?
Clusters 1 and 2 were the more urbanized clusters. 4 and 5 were more of like the forests and stuff, and cluster 3 was kind of like an in-between.
So they just found more species richness and with certain groups in the non-urbanized areas than the urban areas.
Yeah.
Okay, because that's kind of I could see a lot of you guys using this paper for your proposals, because it kind of is a general, their big picture is just a general that there are more birds, more species diversity, and more birds of these kind of certain foraging groups or nesting groups in non-urbanized areas, right?
Yeah, that was basically the main point of the paper. Is there is a difference between urbanized areas and non-urbanized areas.
Mm-hmm. And I think everyone's been struggling to find that information in North America, but I think in this case it's totally fine to use from another like continent, because these are all just concepts that totally should apply to birds here or there. So everyone could probably use this paper as like their broad scale, like why is urbanization an issue? Well, for one, urbanization reduces species diversity in birds. Anybody else have any questions for Zach? Okay, cool. I liked it. That was yeah, I don't know how we clap on Zoom, but good job.
Thank you.
So I think we're up to Kim. You want to try to share your screen?
Alrighty. Am I sharing? You guys can see this?
Yeah, you go to presenter. That's good.
Cool.
Yep.
All right, so my paper was the urbanization effects on neophilia and risk taking from birds at bird feeders. So we've gone over neophilia and a few times in a couple of Dr. Jackson classes, but it's basically defined as the love and appreciation and acceptance for new and novel concepts. This makes some species more or less inherently capable to approach new concepts and objects. So while there's like an intrinsic component to neophilia, we also have to recognize that it's more than just on a species level, because its experiences and traits to every individual will cause a variation in their approach to new concepts. There's numerous implications that come with understanding neophilia in regards to behavior. It influences the overall survival of a population in a couple of ways, which are listed here as their foraging behaviors and success, nesting habits, approaches to problem solving, reaction to unknown threats, and all of those combined kind of just equate to their overall success with species survival. So the study that they did was data collected in 14 Polish cities that were matched with rural habitats. They measured overall bird abundance and as well as the great tit abundance. Let's see, should I go? All right, we'll start here. So they had a total of 80 urban and 80 rural trials. They used wooden bird feeders as seen here. I don't know if you guys can see my cursor or not, but the photo, they had these wooden bird feeders, and then they had a unidentified object to the birds on top. It was like a green gummy material with hair sticking out of it with yarn. And it was put on half of the sites chosen at random within each habitat, both the rural habitats and the urban habitats. And then they conducted a point count from 100 meters for all the birds seen. And then I think this was interesting because at first it appears that their study was for overall abundance of birds, but then they ended up talking a lot about the great tits in particular. So that kind of goes to show that their data maybe had portrayed a relationship for the great tits more. So here we have in their results, they did find a difference in abundance of birds with the presence of a novel object. And it was a different effect for rural compared to urban environments. So as seen in this figure, they found that there was on average a higher abundance of birds at the novel object feeders in the urban environments compared to the rural. The black lines here are the medians, and then these are the sorry. Oop, there we go. The black lines are the medians, and then the interquartile ranges are the box plots, and the 5th and 95th percentile are all the way up here. So for the urban environments here, you can tell that there's a little bit of a difference. They classified it as an intermediate effect, so not greatly, but they still did find a statistical difference. So what does this observation mean? It means that birds of an urban environment express higher levels of neophilia, which gives them a greater chance of success for exploiting new or unpredictable resources. So they said that they were talking about specifically great tits in this, but then a lot of their results and the data for their results had been all encompassing for all species. But when you look at the species breakdown, which I have over here, which has a lot of numbers, but the most important thing to see is that great tits all the way up here, the number of observations is ridiculous in comparison to the rest of them. Some of them down here only have one, they only saw one bird of that species. Meanwhile, they found over 1,000 observations of great tits. So clearly they had catered their experiment to be more species specific once they had found this result. So their implications of their research. Also, I want to clarify, this picture took me a lot longer than I'd like to admit to get the bird on the building. But their implications is that neophilia is thought to be a characteristic of what they call super exploiters, which are species that encounter new concepts and problems with high success. And from their data, it suggests that birds from an urban environment may be able to express a greater love for novel items and then can exploit their rapidly urbanizing environment with a much greater success. And that's my work cited.
Yay, thank you. So do you remember, like, did they have, it was great tits that were both in their urban and their rural site?
Yeah, for both of them.
Okay, so that's kind of funny. So it's not that it's a different species that they're saying, it's that the individuals in that species are more like bold or, you know, new loving, even though it's the same species. I think that's kind of cool, because I usually think of it as like a species as a whole is like tolerant of new things or not.
Yeah, this one, that's what I was kind of interested with this as well. It was more, I felt like it was a little bit more individualized from bird to bird compared to just the intrinsic acceptance of a new concept among like a species.
Yeah, so it's like, what did we, that like Kenya paper or whatever, where they were talking about, you know, at the edges of the range are the bolder versions of the house sparrow, right? I guess that was in the Genius of Birds. It's kind of the same idea that like the leaders in getting into this place have certain like personality traits. That's really cool. Anyone else have questions for Kim? I can geek out. And also, I'm almost crying based on you guys explaining your graphs so well, both you and Zach. I feel like that's biostats kind of coming through. I hope that's kind of exciting for you guys too, to be able to see how much you learned this semester despite having a crazy semester. So any other questions for Kim? That was a really cool article. I could see a lot of you guys also using that as like an indication of personality traits in urban versus rural populations. Okay, let's go to Tiffani then, who hopefully can share her screen. Doubled up, Tiffani.
Okay, let's try it.
Nice.
Okay, good.
You just got to go to presenter mode or present it.
Where it's loading. Do. Okay, looks like it's not loading.
Oh, there.
Zoom. Okay.
There you
Okay,
go.
cool.
Just a little slow.
So my paper was the feeding behavior of the Cooper's hawk at urban and rural nesting sites in southeastern Arizona. Paper by Wendy Estes and R. William Gannon. Okay, so the study location is in Tucson, Arizona. So scientists observed nests of Cooper's hawk in Tucson, Arizona, and in surrounding rural areas. They observed 18 nests from each site. The urban study site, Tucson, is about 70,000 hectares in size and has an estimated human population of over 800,000 residents and is located in the Sonoran Desert. Patches of native Sonoran Desert vegetation persist in Tucson, but much of the natural vegetation has been removed or replaced with exotic. Okay, so the study species is a Cooper's hawk. These hawks are they're a crow-sized raptor. Looking on the map for eBird, they're distributed all over North America, so this could happen not just in Arizona, but pretty much any city. Cooper's hawks are now fairly common urban and suburban birds rather than living in their native forest habitats, and they are aerial predators. So the picture on the bottom left here depicts them being an aerial predator because right there in the talon, they caught a big, thick pigeon to eat. And this picture just shows a juvenile Cooper's hawk just perching. Okay, so on this slide, I have various pictures of the Cooper's hawk. So in this bottom right picture here, I have a picture of a juvenile with its juvenile plumage. It kind of looks like a red-tailed hawk, which is interesting to me because I love red-tailed hawks. Here's a picture depicting the wingspan, and here is an adult male Cooper's hawk. So you can definitively see the differences between the juvenile and the adult because they have more red plumage on their chest and more like dark gray black on their wings and their head. And this is a hawk with some dynamic flying skills, flying through a tree, and then a Cooper's hawk mobbing a great horned owl. So the behavior of a Cooper's hawk. So I will play a video of the call. Or not. Hopefully you guys heard that.
Oh God, we got
no.
some echo,
No,
but that we did
we're
hear
not
it.
messing with that. Okay. And then I'll play this without sound to make it easier. But this displays their aerial predator behavior. So the bird that is the larger one, which is going to be this one, is the Cooper's hawk, and the smaller one is the pigeon. So going through to find videos and pictures of this hawk, I was just amazed as to how this hawk can just fly around like this to catch like a flying bird. Like, that's insane. Okay. So research overview. So nestling Cooper's hawks seem to be more susceptible to infection by T. gallinae than adult hawks. So raptors contract trichomoniasis, which is a parasitic protozoan, and they get that by ingesting prey. So their main prey in this study are like doves and pigeons in the city. So the rate of infection of nestling Cooper's hawks is about up to 85% in the urban nest sites that they studied, and 9% at rural. So the urban dove population has a higher rate of infection than the rural doves. I guess this might be kind of related with sicknesses being being contracted at bird feeders. And then down at the bottom left, I have a fun little picture of the trichomoniasis that affects the hawks. And a new word that I found out this week is frounce. And frounce is a form of trichomoniasis affecting hawks, resulting in a sore with a cheesy secretion in the mouth or throat. I had to just add a picture of that because it said cheesy. So there's that beautiful trichomoniasis cheese. Okay. So urban areas often support a greater abundance of avian prey species than surrounding rural areas, but the prey are less diverse. So rural hawks caught a greater variety of prey than urban hawks. So in the city, reading this, in the city, in my mind, I thought there's more abundance but less diversity because the city's pretty much the same, like one same environment, so it could just hold a bunch of one or handful of species. And then in the rural areas, it's more vast and more plant diversity, and that's just going to lead to more diversity in the species out there. Okay. The rate of prey delivery remained relatively constant throughout the day at rural nests, but declined sharply during midday at urban sites. This is because of the immense heat midday, and the hawks anticipate the loss of energy flying around in the heat trying to catch prey. So something interesting here is I'm guessing that the hawks kind of honed in on the intense heat midday. So the reason why it's so hot in the urban sites is because of sunshine reflecting off buildings and just making the city just kind of unbearably hot. So the Cooper's hawks pick up on that, and they hunt in the morning, in the afternoon, but midday it just kind of slumps. And that brings me to the figure. So this figure shows the interaction of time of day between nest type and rate of delivery at Cooper's hawks nests. So on the x-axis, there's morning, midday, and afternoon, and on the y, there's prey items per hour. I think they based the increment on the y-axis on this has something to do with average prey weight. But like I said before, the urban in the morning, it's really high with 0.8 prey items per hour, and then it sinks down midday to around 0.4. So that's half of what they would be eating in the morning. And then afternoon, it skyrockets back up because the sun moves and it's not reflecting on those buildings. And then it stays pretty much constant throughout the rural area because there's no buildings there to have an influx of heat. So discussion. So Cooper's hawks display high cognition, insight, reasoning, and planning. This requires a deep thought process, and they know when midday is coming, so they can hunt more in the morning and then relax midday to reserve energy for afternoon hunting. To me, I went back into the Genius of Birds book to get this description. So the second I read in the paper that they wait midday, that's kind of like a routine that they're forming, and it shows reasoning and planning. So I thought that was grounds for high cognition for the Cooper's hawks. And then also causal reasoning is the relationship between the cause and effect, the effect of forces that can't always be seen, i.e. the heat in Tucson near midday. So they can't see the heat, but they can feel it, and by doing that, they can adjust when they're going to go hunting. And then urbanization in this case can positively influence foraging behaviors. The abundance of prey in an urban setting increases foraging capacity. I think this could be good and bad, going back to the trichomoniasis, because they do have an abundance of prey, but that prey can be riddled with disease and parasites. So there's pros and cons of urbanization for sure. Okay, and there is my paper and my Google, my references, and that is all.
Yay. So Tiff, like, do you think, did they put any like value judgment in the paper on that urban areas are bad for Cooper's hawks? Because like, it's really interesting to me, that graph that you showed, because it's like, overall they're getting the same amount of food, but they can get so much more food in the morning and evening than the rural site, and then they have to stop foraging in the middle of the day, but they come out okay. So does that mean it's fine in terms of prey to live in the urban site, do you think?
Yeah, I think it's fine in terms of prey, because you can get prey wherever you want if you're a Cooper's hawk in an urban site, because there's just so much of it there. I would say the only bad thing about it is being in an urban site, it leads to more parasites, and I'm not too sure, because the paper didn't go in depth about it, how the parasites affect the young. Like, I'm not too sure if the trichomoniasis, like, if you can get like help for that, like if a wildlife rehabber can fix that, or a vet can fix that. But I would say that's the only downside of being in an urban environment.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's good news. I think they're definitely one of the species that could be considered like a total urban exploiter, like based on what you said, which is that like not every hawk or owl or raptor is going to be able to use an urban setting, but these guys definitely seem to have, for the most part, adapted to that area, and that's pretty cool.
I thought it was pretty cool.
Yeah, yeah. The cheesy tongue thing, that's not something I want. That's pretty gross.
Yeah, coming from a vet tech perspective, I needed to have the picture of the trichomoniasis because I was like, hey, look at this cruel protozoan and look what it does.
Yeah, it's pretty wild. That yeah, I want to learn more about that now. Cool. Any other questions for Tiffany?
Good job, Tiff.
Yeah, that
Good
was
job.
really, everyone's doing a great job today. I like everyone's slightly different flair on what you guys find interesting, which is kind of my point for this. There weren't a lot of, you have to talk about these different things. It seems like everybody's telling us what they find interesting, which I love. All right, Andre, you want to do our last one of the day?
Yes. So one thing before I start, I'll pull up the graph for you quickly. It's not really a graph, it's more of a table, but there's a bigger table in my paper, and that I couldn't even post on the PowerPoint because it was just so big. I
Mm-hmm.
don't know if this is something I can talk about, or if I should try and find something different.
No, you can talk about that.
Okay. All right. I just want to make sure that was all right. Well, let me go to my PowerPoint. All right. So my paper was it was the organization and differentiation of breeding bird communities across a forested to urban landscape. So just a little background of the research. I know the picture's funny, but there's a reason it's there. So researchers studied breeding birds and how they are affected by urbanization, and many of the questions they brought up were things like that we always talk about, what behaviors change, how communities interact with urban areas, what are the differences in species responses, and one big thing they brought up was, does differing biogeographical areas impact different responses to urbanization depending on those areas? And the reason the birds or the cats here is because cats are, it's suggested they are the greatest source of mortality for birds and mammals, killing an estimated 1.4 to 3.7 billion birds annually in the U.S. alone. I don't know if that statistic's right, but this is what the paper had given me. So This research was carried out in a Mediterranean city called Kavala in Greece. And basically, so 49 species were observed, including, the ones we know, like the house sparrow, the European starling, the feral pigeon, barn swallow. These are all birds that are commonly seen in urban areas. And the researchers examined breeding bird communities and how these communities respond to urbanization. They also observed how urbanization impacts species diversity and how different species might respond differently to urbanization. And they had two hypotheses. The first one was breeding bird communities in the peri-urban, me and Dr. Jackson talked a lot about this, was so peri-urban forest is like land that's separate from the urban area, but there's still some urbanization kind of scattered around in there. I guess rural, but this was what the term they put in. So breeding bird communities in the peri-urban forest, the forest ecotone, and the urban green spaces. These were the three habitats they kind of divided between. They will differ in composition, diversity, abundance, and structure. And their second hypothesis was different bird species will be representative for each community. So this was actually the map they had of all the point sources where they counted and observed these birds. Sorry, just moving. But yeah, so these were the different areas. They were all at least about 250 meters apart. They would go there in the early morning, 5 days a week, or 5 days in 1 week of every month. It was always the second week of every month, which was April through June. And yeah, it was a 3-month cycle they did. And the reason they did from April to June was to basically reduce the possibility of not recording late nesters, birds that might arrive later or migrate later to Greece. And as I said, points were located 250 meters apart. And the counts were conducted in the early mornings when bird activity was at its highest, which we have all talked about before. And the breeding bird communities were assessed in two main habitats, which was the peri-urban forest and then the urban green spaces. But they considered that species and communities may not respond to habitat edges in similar ways. And the point counts started, like in these areas, they started 5 minutes after they arrived at the census plot, basically so the observer could settle in and the birds could, start to flock back around. And these counts lasted 10 minutes at each site. And the counts were performed by the same observer to avoid introducing an observer effect, which I think we talked broadly about when we were reading The Genius of Birds. I think we talked about that with crows specifically, and how many researchers had gone through that and end up scaring many crows away, and crows became aware of such situations. Sorry, I have notes in front of me, so I'm just sliding through. But the counts of breeding birds were carried out in these cycles. And then so there was 21 point count plots in urban green spaces, 22 in the forest ecotone, and 20 in the peri-urban forest. And each monthly cycle was carried out in 5-day periods, all in the second week of April, May, and June. And so for the results, out of these 49 bird species which were recorded, obviously there was a lot that flocked to different areas. You'd see a couple in urban and forest ecotone. You'd see some birds in all of them. But there was 32 species in urban green spaces, 42 in the forest ecotone, and then 39 in the peri-urban forest. And the abundance of birds in urban green spaces was significantly higher than the forest ecotone. And overall, so the abundance was much higher in urban green spaces than the forest ecotone, the peri-urban forest. But whereas species richness was much lower in the city than the forest ecotone and peri-urban forest, which is commonly discovered in results with studies like this. And the species most associated with urban green spaces were birds such as, the northern house martin, the house sparrow, the feral pigeon, the barn swallow, the western jackdaw, which I had never heard of that one before, and much of the forested habitat was represented by the Eurasian blackbird, the Sardinian warbler, the Eurasian jay, the Searle bunting, the common warbler, the subalpine warbler, and the European robin. And this is the European robin, which is a lot smaller looking than our American robin. Cute looking though. And so basically this is the table showing which birds were more likely to be seen in the forest in the ecotone around here, and then which were the city dwellers. So basically they divided this by avoiders, utilizers, and dwellers, and then just dwellers, which were the birds that were mostly seen in the urban areas, starting to dwell into the forest ecotone. And then the utilizers were mostly seen in the ecotone, but they would occasionally dwell off into the city. And then the avoiders were the birds that were strictly seen only in the forest. And that is my work.
Good job. Yeah, everyone's finding international papers, but I think that makes a lot of sense. They had those 3 areas and certain species. So like if Kim's paper was about like one specific species acting differently in different areas, yours is about species as a whole preferring to be in urban or non-urban areas.
Yeah.
So 2 ends of the coin. That's cool.
And it's funny because like with my proposal, which my proposal was like for instance, do urban dwellers prefer parking lots, or do they prefer school fields, like things like that? And the way they went about their methods is very similar to how I would envision that with my methods.
Mm-hmm.
But they also studied this Kavala in Greece. They studied it because there was not really many studies done there specifically, which is, I think it's Southeastern Europe. So.
Cool. I think the only other thing I wanted to know, I think their observer effect is a little bit different than the crow one.
It was, yeah.
Yeah, I think that what they're talking about there, and you could totally see this in any point count, that some people are better at identifying birds because there is a level of like ability, right? So like if you're doing a point count and you don't know a song of a certain bird, you're never going to count that bird. And so that's the worry about observer effect, that if you sent a really good observer who knows all the calls to the forest and a mediocre observer to the urban area, and the urban area observer doesn't hear anything, it might just be because they don't know the calls that they're trying to listen for. And so they usually do it by like either like randomizing who goes where or doing one observer, so that like I know all the calls in this area, like that's all I can do.
Okay, that makes sense.
Yeah, because I've always wondered that if we had been on campus, I would have had us do more point counts, and you guys would have really seen that it is, you read about the papers of point counts and it all relies on the person standing there actually knowing every bird species by call, which is pretty hard, like to know every single one. That so within those 5 minutes that you're doing your point count, you're like yep, and naming them all. Like
that takes a long time to pick up on.
yeah people get really good at it, and then like that could be like your career as being a technician that goes around and does point counts, because a person who's really good at it is rare to find. Like I've never been hired to do point counts because I think I'm pretty mediocre. I'm getting better now that I've been on the East Coast for 3 years and doing a lot of birding and stuff, but I still don't know if every time I went to a point count, if I could 100% identify every bird that I heard. So that's kind of funny.
One question to add on to that, because I've been hearing their calls a ton and I see them a ton, having to do with the American robin. When I was on the Cornell Lab of Ornithology, they said that the American robin is kind of like dissipating away from the Northeast, like they're becoming less and less common around here.
Oh, I didn't know that.
I don't know how, again, it's the only reason I found it weird was because I see robins all the time,
Yeah.
all the time around here. But
Me
I know
too.
they said like the northern flicker is something that's starting to dissipate from the northeast.
I mean, maybe that's only something that you could pick up in terms of you actually having long-term data, because like they're still here, but maybe they're not in the high numbers that they
That's true.
usually are in the spring. Like I don't know if I could pick up on that, but they're definitely still here. They're not gone.
Yeah, I was gonna say, I was like, I see them. They actually, I hear their calls, I think, more than any other bird, honestly, around here.
Oh yeah, and because they sing a lot, and I've got such a hatred of robins, but their call, they just like they don't stop. Like I think they just kind of keep going with that sing song call. So yeah, they're pretty common to
They
hear.
like to talk. They're
Mhm.
not social distancing.
No, no.
I just realized my name's Drink Isopropyl during this time I've been presenting, so.
Oh yeah, you were that in biostats
Oh,
too.
I know. I
Yeah.
just, yeah. Don't drink isopropyl.
All right, good job, everybody. I think actually, if you guys who presented, if you can upload your slides to the assignment in Moodle, but also the PDF of the paper, I might post both of those. If you guys are okay, I'll post them on Moodle so that everybody in the class can download those PDFs, and you kind of help them if they want to add them into their papers in the future. I think that could be really helpful rather than everyone having to go back through the library databases to find those papers. Because I think all 4 of those were really good choices because they are things that other people can definitely use to kind of boost their lit cited for their final project. Because remember, you did your annotated bibliography with 6 papers, but I want at least 8 papers in your final thing. But just start compiling what people are presenting and get those worked into your final paper. So on board for I just had this up. So on board for Thursday is Toby, Jenny, Patrick, Paula. Does that work for everybody? If you think you're going to have technology issues, there is also, you could pre-record and put your presentation on YouTube, and we could watch the YouTube link. If you're worried about having quiet time in your house or something like that, just reach out to me if that's something that's an issue for the future. But I still want everyone to get to see your presentation and kind of learn about your papers. Thanks for everybody who's brave enough to go today. I think that was really good. I learned a lot. Anybody got any questions about the rest of the week or what we're doing?
Proposals due Friday.
Yeah. Yep. The rough draft of it.
Okay. Oh, well, yeah. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
One thing I may have trouble submitting this article as a PDF. I'm trying to save it as a PDF, but it seems to not want to do it. Yeah, I'll try and figure it out.
Okay, if not, maybe just, yeah, making sure.
I'll email you if I have any issues.
Yeah, okay, cool.
Thank you, Professor.
All right, thank you guys. I'll see you Thursday. Stay safe.
You too.
Stay sane.